From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. A massive reservoir project that will eventually clear the way for 500,000 new residents in northern Colorado is now a step closer to breaking ground. The $2 billion water project has been tied up in planning and permitting for more than 2 decades. Advocates for the Northern Integrated Supply Project, or NISP as it's called, say it's essential that fast-growing communities in Larimer and Weld counties have the water they need as development booms. The project cleared a final hurdle recently after an environmental group that had sued to stop the project agreed to settle the case. Alex Hager covers water issues for KUNC, and he's here to explain how NISP will supply water to 15 growing towns and water districts, and how 2 new reservoirs that are part of the project will transform northern Colorado. Alex, welcome back to In The NoCo.
Hey, Erin, thanks for having me back.
NISP was first proposed back in the early 2000s as a way to shore up water supplies for growing cities and towns in northern Colorado. How important is NISP to the area's future?
Well, the big thing here is future security. The towns that are getting water from it, they're not going to run out of water anytime soon, but they are growing fast and they anticipate that they're going to keep growing. So this project is designed to give them some peace of mind. Let's take a look at the town of Erie for a second. They are set to receive the second biggest share of water from this project. So Erie's population has more than tripled in the past couple decades. It is expected to keep growing. So to make sure they keep taps flowing to all of those people who weren't in Erie 20 years ago, they want to draw from a reservoir that wasn't here 20 years ago.
So when was the last time Colorado saw a new reservoir of this size come online?
It does not happen often. The amount of water that Glade Reservoir can hold will make it one of the 10 largest in the state. That is a pretty big deal because pretty much every other reservoir on that list was built back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. I think that really speaks to the amount of growth we're seeing on the Northern Front Range. Northern Water wants to build this project, which will be larger than Horsetooth Reservoir when it's done. Wow. And right now it is almost finished building another big reservoir, totally separate from this one, outside of Loveland.
This project has been in the works for a very long time, Alex. How unusual is it for a reservoir project to take 2 decades before it even breaks ground?
At this point, it is not super uncommon. Anyone who wants to build a new reservoir, they're going to be undertaking a massive construction project. You're building a dam to hold back an entire lake. You want to make sure that's done right. Not to mention, you are flooding a huge amount of land, so the state wants to do some studies to make sure they're not harming local wildlife.
Right.
Sometimes you literally have to reroute an entire highway to make room for a reservoir. That is happening with NISP and Route 287. All of that takes time. And then if anyone opposes the project, which has tended to be the case here in Colorado, you're going to see environmental groups filing lawsuits to block that construction. So that also makes the timeline longer.
Well, speaking of opposition, not long after NISP was announced, environmental groups began to protest the creation of the 2 reservoirs. Most of the opposition seemed to happen around the proposed Glade Reservoir. That's the one that would divert water from the Poudre River north of Fort Collins. Now, what were their main concerns, Alex?
Look, people opposed to this project, they're principally worried about how much water it would take out of the Cache-la-Poudre River. A lot of times, this river is referred to as a quote-unquote working river just because of how much water is already pulled out of it for farms and cities across northern Colorado, out on the eastern plains. It's also feeling the strain of climate change, which means less new water is going to be entering the river in the long term. So opponents to these new reservoirs, they say, look, the river is already really taxed. Why should we build something new to take more water out of it?
Well, we have to talk about the naked protesters with the group Save the Poudre that people may remember. Alex, this was a small group of folks in 2008 who came up with a pretty bold idea to draw attention to NISP. They took their clothes off, got in the water, and posed for photographs. How successful were their attempts to raise public opposition against this project?
That is, of course, a matter of opinion. But you could probably say that they succeeded in, at the very least, getting more people to think about water. You still see posters of those naked protesters up around Fort Collins. I see bumper stickers opposing Glade Reservoir. In 2020, the Fort Collins City Council actually voted to oppose the construction of NISP. They had a list of technical reasons for why they did that, but city council members say they got a ton of emails from people who heard about the reservoir project and didn't want it to happen. So at least on the public awareness front, you could say that they made some efforts.
Right. Save the Poudre recently settled, as we mentioned, for $100 million. That settlement seemed like the last sort of legal hurdle to be cleared. Is this the last of the legal opposition to NISP?
Yeah, the Save the Poudre lawsuit was the major opposition to NISP. The people behind the reservoirs say with the lawsuit going away, the construction timeline could move up by a whole year. They've been working for more than 2 decades to plan and design and get permits, so now they're kind of in the final furlong before they actually start digging.
Now that the project can move forward, Alex, what is the timeline for building these reservoirs?
A spokesman for Northern Water said they're planning to start construction next year in 2026, maybe some prep work this summer and this fall. After that, it's going to take years to build. So we can look for some clues about that timeline down at Chimney Hollow Reservoir. That's a totally separate project, but it's being built by the same agency that's in the foothills outside of Loveland. That one's going to take about 4 years of construction and then another 3 to fill with water. So realistically, we're not going to see this reservoir really get online in earnest until the 2030s.
Alex, one of the 2 reservoirs, Glade Reservoir, will be located north of Fort Collins. This is going to basically flood the valley where Highway 287 runs right now. What happens to the area, and what will be lost when the reservoir is built?
Yeah, if you've ever driven from Fort Collins up north to Laramie, Wyoming, you have probably driven right through the future reservoir. You know that section of Highway 287 that goes past the big rock covered with graffiti? That's going to be underwater if this reservoir becomes a reality. So there is a plan to build a new stretch of Highway 287 on the other side of that big ridge. It's going to be a little further east, and then it'll rejoin the original road closer to Wyoming.
Recreation is such a big part of the Poudre, fishing, tubing, whitewater rafting. How are our officials with Northern Water ensuring that recreation and tourism on the river are not impacted by NISP?
Yeah, as part of the PR campaign to build up support for this reservoir, Northern Water actually highlights recreation as one of the big pluses of Glade Reservoir. They say it'll come with $24 million of new recreation facilities, so trails, a boat ramp, campgrounds, that kind of thing. The sort of stuff we already have at Horsetooth Reservoir. If you've been to Horsetooth Reservoir, you know that recreation on the water tends to be a little friendlier to motorized boats than tubes and paddleboards and kayaks.
Sure.
When it comes to the Poudre itself, this is one of the big concerns of environmental groups. They say taking water out of the river could bring down the amount that flows downstream. Northern Water counters, they say they have a plan for that. They claim that they're going to have strategic water releases from Glade Reservoir, and that's going to mean that the number of days suitable for tubing in the river will actually go up by 20%, and the number of kayaking days should stay about the same.
Alex Hager covers water issues for KUNC. We'll have links to his reporting on this project in our show notes and at kunc.org. Alex, thanks so much for talking with me.
Thank you, Erin.
That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thank you so much for listening.